System, I think it's first class. It's almost without delay. You can get to see a doctor in 1 or 2 days of notice, and the hospital's first class, yes.
I'm in a fortunate position where I've got private healthcare, so I have it covered. I can see how it's frustrating for those that don't have it and how it's expensive, but you can't maintain a system that's completely free all the time.
If you're taken ill suddenly or involved in an accident, you may need an ambulance. And on some of the outlying islands, that might mean sending a boat or a helicopter. The Marine Ambulance Service covers the smaller islands around Guernsey. Local people can either take out an annual subscription or might have to pay hundreds of pounds to be picked up and taken to hospital. John Bozia is Chief Officer of Guernsey St John Ambulance Service.
Payment is mentioned as part of the clinical care that we provide. They are sent an invoice within a couple of weeks following the use of the ambulance service, and then normally then specify whatever means they will be settled. That doesn't mean that some people don't settle, because some people don't settle, and we have ways and means of ensuring that we collect those debts in a caring and compassionate way.
So what about hospital care? Well, I'm at reception at the Princess Elizabeth Hospital. If you come to A&E, you will be charged. Just looking at a board here in reception, £49.50 if you come during the daytime. Overnight, the charge goes up to more than £100. But for outpatient appointments and for admission to hospital and care in the hospital, that is actually free, paid for by the government. But longer term, there could be changes. Some Guernsey politicians are worried the system is unfair to those who don't qualify for benefits and don't have insurance. They're being forced for a review. Heidi Solsvik is the president of the Committee for Health and Social Care.
For those people, just above that benefits threshold, they might not go to the GP early enough, and that might mean that when they do present, things have got worse, and then they have to be treated in more the hospital environment by specialist consultants, where it's just more expensive, and it makes it harder for that individual. We find that possibly that people who could have their treatment by a GP and have several treatments and meet their GP more than once can be pushed into that specialist hospital environment because it's seen as free, paid for directly by government and not the individual.
It's an island community, relatively well off, with a population of just over 60,000. That's equivalent to a medium-sized town in the UK, so it's hard to draw obvious conclusions for the NHS from what happens in Guernsey. But if anyone wants to see a patient payment system and its pros and cons, it does merit closer inspection.
You've been in Guernsey. As I say, this time next week we'll talk in great detail about social care in the UK. Our series begins on Monday. Join us for that if you can. Sometimes on a Friday we take time around now to devote some airtime to a single interview with someone with something interesting to tell us. And we're going to do that now. The death of a family member is one of the most traumatic things a person can experience. What we have for you now is the story of a man whose grief and upset over the death of his brother was magnified and extended in ways most bereaved people don't have to suffer. And it's still not over, nearly 30 years after his brother died. Scott Johnson was outwardly happy, about to finish a PhD, and was in a long-term relationship. Police said his death was suicide. But now, thanks to his brother Steve, doubt has been cast on not only what the police said, but what they did in response to Scott's death and the deaths of others. As you'll hear, Scott's life began in the United States, it involved the UK, and it ended in Australia back in 1988. Scott's brother Steve told us more about him.
Scott and I were very close. He was 2.5 years younger than I am, and a brilliant kid, a brilliant man, very smart in mathematics. He went to Caltech and graduated at the top of his class, and then went on to Cambridge in England for a year before going on to Australia. He was a lovely, warm, gentle young man.
Had he fallen in love?
He'd fallen in love at Cambridge. In fact, he told me that that's where he discovered he was gay, and the man he fell in love with is the man he pursued in Australia.
It's quite a long way to go for love.
We do amazing things for love, don't we? He had started at graduate school at Berkeley, and he had missed his boyfriend so much, he finally quit and came to Harvard here in Cambridge, where I still live, and worked at Harvard for a few months while he was waiting for a visa to make the move to Australia.
So he was a good younger brother. Were you a good older brother?
I tried to be. We did lots of things together. We climbed mountains. We did math together. We programmed together. We taught ourselves programming together, which eventually became my profession. And we corresponded. Back in those days, there was no internet or email, and we were poor graduate students, so we couldn't afford long-distance phone calls.
Tell me about the phone call that told you all was not well.
I got a phone call from Scott's boyfriend, who said that his body had been found at the bottom of a cliff. No details, no explanation, and Scott was dead. I quickly found a way to get to Australia, not having a lot of money, pulled the funds together and got a visa and arrived in Australia about 2 days later, flew to Sydney.
That must have been, it's a long flight anyway, but it must have been the longest journey.
It was terrible. The bottom fell out of my life for a year. I had just had a baby. My firstborn was about 6 weeks old, and fortunately I had her and my wife to hang on to for that first terrible year after Scott died.
Now, the circumstances in which his body was found led the police, I believe, to believe at least this was a suicide. He'd taken his own life.
Well, when I arrived to Sydney, to the Manly police station, Manly is a small beach town in northern Sydney, the constable who had recovered Scott's body simply told me this is where people go to jump. And then he leaned forward and said, "Did you know your brother was homosexual?" As if that were explanation enough why Scott would have done that. Scott's body was found naked, and the constable said his clothes were folded on the top of the cliff, and in his opinion this was a ritual suicide.
A ritual? What would make him think that?
Interestingly, some years later, when we talked to that same constable and his colleague from that same police station who flew all the rescue operations to recover bodies in that area, said that never had they heard of or seen a naked jumper. So this was just something he concocted in his mind to explain it to me. What he hadn't told me was this was a popular place for gay men to go meet each other, and often that would mean that they would take their clothes off, fold them, and wait for companions to come along and engage in lovemaking on that same cliff. And this was well known to the police and to everyone else in that town, but the constable failed to mention it to me.
So on that initial visit, you're dealing with the grief, and I expect a lot of paperwork and trying to find out what happened. Did you believe that the account of this being Scott taking his own life was probably what happened? Did you always believe that? How credible was it for you?
It's something I never believed. In Scott's circumstances, he had just spoken to his professor. I actually stayed at his professor's house that week, who was not only grief-stricken but beside himself because he had just had a conversation with Scott. He was the last person we know of to talk to Scott. That Scott had solved the final problem necessary for his PhD, so he had just given Scott good news, and to our mind, Scott would have put his pencil down after many months of hard work and gone to go celebrate. It was not a possibility in our minds, but we had no other scenario that we could think of. I did not know about the violence that was commonplace in the beach areas where gay men would go meet. The police didn't tell me about the violence, and so it was just one big question mark.
How did that come to your attention?
Well, after pretty much camping out in the police station that week and trying to get the police to at least take Scott's picture up and down the Corso to see if anyone had seen him, to try to do some semblance of an investigation, the police refused. I finally went home, and the police buttoned it up as a suicide. And it wasn't until 17 years later when news came to my attention that there had been an inquest in Sydney, another set of cliffs at Bondi Beach, a very famous beach in southern part of Sydney. There had been an inquest looking into the deaths of 3 men who had been discovered at the bottom of the cliff there at Bondi. And the coroner had concluded these deaths that the police had called suicides were actually murders, probably caused by gangs of young men who regularly roamed these gay meeting places to assault and attack and rob and sometimes kill the men they found there. So when I read about that news, it seemed almost certainly to have been what happened to Scott.
Must have been quite a moment.
It was a devastating, bewildering day when I got that news. It was a scenario that I knew the police had known when I traveled to Sydney to find out what happened to my brother, but failed to mention. That was almost beside the point at that moment, though, because I picked up the phone and dialed the coroner, dialed the police station. There's another victim that's not on your list. It's my brother. And I didn't get any answer for a year until I traveled there.
What happened when you got there?
Well, I met up with the police officer that actually did the inquest that resulted in the homicide finding of the 3 other men in Bondi. His name is Steve Page, a sterling prince of a fellow. No longer a police officer, but he and I walked into the Manly police station and talked to the officers there to let them know that they should take another look at this death that had happened 20 years earlier. The police promised to take a look at it, and I went back to the States. For the next year, I got occasional emails saying that they were having trouble finding the file. So in 2007, I finally hired my own investigator and went to work. I wasn't hard to discover that the area where Scott died was also a beat, which is what they call the gay meeting places, and that court records showed there were dozens and dozens of cases of assaults against gay men in that area.
And at that point, and I suppose even now as we speak, do you have any satisfactory answers, any understanding as to why the police at these various stages didn't furnish you with the information about what was actually going on in the area and didn't appear to make part of their inquiries?
It seemed to be the habit of the police to treat deaths of gay men this way, particularly before 1990. There was a certain enlightenment that happened after that where there was more understanding of the gay community, but before that, police would routinely try to sweep these deaths under the rug. The police minister at the time, in the 80s, Ted Pickering, was quoted in the New York Times last week as saying that the attackers were doing this with almost certain knowledge the police would not have gone after them. So the police, in some sense, at the time were co-conspirators. And in fact, we know that in some cases, the police were actually the perpetrators of the assaults, yes.
How do you know that?
There are several cases of people who've come forward saying that they were attacked by the police. There were so-called hoodlum patrols in the New South Wales police that would patrol these areas in plain clothes and clean up the areas was their mission. It was illegal to be gay in New South Wales until 1984, so this I take it, they viewed as part of their job.
Now, you mentioned hiring your own detective, which in and of itself was quite a step. We could spend a long time discussing, I'm sure. What progress did your detective make?
Well, he's not actually a detective, he's an investigative journalist. Right. And in fact, quite a lot has happened in the last couple of years, building on the research and the work that Dan Click has done. So the work that he's done, looking at court records of the gangs in this particular area, which we've now fed to the police. For a while, the police just seemed to have been throwing all this in a circular file. Finally, we got the attention of a coroner in 2012 who took a close look at Dan's work, showing that there was plenty of violence in the area and that this place where Scott fell from the cliff was a very popular gay meeting place. and she reopened the case and handed it back over to the police. Still no action. Thank God for the media, because in 2013, a popular TV show in Australia did a documentary of Scott's case that motivated the police to form an investigative team. That team, still building on my investigators' work, started interviewing all the people of interest that he had identified. And that brings us to 2015, when the police tried to close the case again with no conclusion.
Why did they do that?
That's a good question, Eddie. We strongly feel they were not honestly trying to solve the case, whether that was because they didn't want to admit that they were wrong in the first place, or whether if they make progress on Scott's case, then the 30 or 40 other cases of gay men who died in that same time will also have to be looked at. So maybe they're afraid of the floodgate opening.
I mean, 30 or 40 deaths. I mean, one is obviously unacceptable, but that's, in other circumstances, that would be, people would call that serial killing, would call it mass murder.
Those are good words for it. It was because of the police indifference, open season on gay men in the 1980s in New South Wales. And there were gangs. We've talked to one gang member in the area where Scott died, who said that they would go a couple of times a week to these gay beats, and they had the king hit down. A single hit would take the victim down, rob them, take their money, their rings, their leather jacket, and move on to the bar. And this was just like an ATM machine. And so it was horrific. The epidemic of violence was terrible and shameless.
Another factor in all of this I want to ask you about is a Facebook posting which sent you in another direction.
In 2011, it came to our attention on the Gay Marriage in Australia Facebook page that someone had posted, "I hereby confess to killing Scott Johnson." We took that to the police. The police were not interested. We took it to the coroner, and the coroner at that time required the police to look into it.
It took a coroner to force the police to investigate an online confession to killing.